StrayAllDay.com.
You are now tuned in to the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative. What is that? That is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then what we do is we put all this together into one bundle, one package, one mindset, one method, one philosophy. We wrote a book on the subject. You are listening to the Daily Masterclass. It is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as Dre All Day, and welcome to the show. And today's topic: if I were starting all over again as an athlete, here's what I would do. Now, I've answered this question of what I would do if I was starting over again, for example, selling products. I just did this in episode number 1608. I did in episode 1017 how I would play professional basketball if I was starting today. And I just talked about how I would get into pro basketball, let's say if I was graduating from college right now. And episode number 684, a kind of different topic, but if you wanted to write a new story just for yourself, you want to change your life from today moving forward, that episode is 684. So just want to refer you to a few where I talked about this starting over type of thing. But the reason I'm doing this episode is because, of course, as my background as a professional athlete, basketball was my sport, for those of you who don't know. Many athletes will ask me, younger athletes will ask me, well, Dre, why didn't you make it to the NBA? Or why do you think you didn't go D1? Or what do you think you could have done to make your career better? And I don't think they're asking it as a way of being critical of me. I think they're asking it because they just want to know what are some things that someone who has the experience that I don't have yet, this is the player thinking, Dre has the experience that I don't have yet, what mistakes does he think he made along the way so I can avoid those mistakes? Or what would he do differently to be better that I could do now since I have the opportunity that he already has lived through. So in today's masterclass, I'm going to talk about what I would do if I was starting over again as an athlete. Let's assume that I'm playing basketball again. What are some things that I would do differently that I think, looking back, would have helped my career be even better, maybe go further, maybe go higher, maybe start sooner, whatever it have anything to make the career better, whatever you consider to be better. So I did this for business, and now I'm going to talk about how I would do it in sports. Simple enough, right? Good. Point number one. Topic once again, what I would do if I was starting all over again as an athlete. First thing I would do is start sooner. Now, this is an easy answer, but it's also a true answer. This is if I was starting over again as an athlete and I know everything. Let's say I'm going back to age 8 and I'm just starting in sports all over again, but I know everything at age 8 that I know now at my current age. What would I do different? The first thing is I would start playing basketball immediately. I wouldn't wait until later on to start playing basketball. I would start playing right now. I didn't start playing until I was around 14 in my actual life, but I would start playing at age 8, age 6. I had my parents put a basketball in my crib when I was born. All right, is that if I know that I'm going to play basketball. Now, if I'm going to be a different person, then maybe not. But knowing that I'm going to become a basketball player, I would start sooner. Very true. Now, since I started at age 14, was a pretty late age. Anybody who knows sports knows. You're starting at age 14. That's late for someone who wants to play in high school, let alone who wants to play in college, let alone you're talking about playing professional basketball. That's ridiculous. So I would definitely have started sooner, and my alternate universe parents would have put a basketball in my crib. My parents weren't those type of parents who were like, all right, we're going to make our kid into an athlete. Neither of my parents was a hardcore athlete, so they weren't like, all right, I'm going to make my son or daughter into an athlete, the athlete that I wasn't, or a better athlete than I was. So it wasn't anything like that. So I would need alternate universe parents, but let's just say I got the same genetics with these different parents. They would have put a basketball in my crib, and they would have played a more active role in helping me find teams. Like, they would have been finding teams for me. So, for example, today on my text number, 305-384-6894, if you have not sent me a text yet, you have a phone, so I don't know why you haven't done it, but send me a text, 305-384-6894. Just today, in my text number, it was Lisa. She was texting me and asking me questions about her son, who is a college basketball player, and his college season is just ending. His college career is ending, and he wants to go play professional basketball, whether that's in the NBA, overseas, whatever. And Lisa, the mom, is texting me and asking me questions, and I provided her a bunch of information, gave her some contacts and people that she could reach out to and all of that. So in my alternate universe life, my parents would be more like Lisa, all right? And my parents would be reaching out to people like Dre Baldwin and getting information about how their kid can advance and go further in basketball. My parents were not hands-on like that, not when it came to sports. for me. Now, they were hands-on as parents, but when it came to sports, they could not have cared less whether I became an athlete, whether I became an engineer, as long as I became something, positive and a positive contributing member of society. I happened to do it through entrepreneurship and sports and the internet, which again, nobody saw this coming the way that it has become. But my parents were not like, all right, we're going to make sure our son becomes an athlete in any sport or anything like that. They weren't driving me to practices and tournaments and signing me up for teams and hiring coaches and reaching out to people like me to get information. They weren't doing anything like that. But again, if I was starting over and I know that I'm going to become an athlete, I would have parents who would do that, who would be all in and doing things like that. I know there are a lot of parents out there who are like that. Many of you are listening to this show right now because you know that I'm a resource for you. My parents would have been like you, all right, if I was doing it all over again. Now, this is not to say, I want to make sure I'm giving you a full disclaimer here. This is not to say, as I think I already alluded to, my parents didn't block me. They weren't like, you're not allowed to play sports. They didn't stop me from trying out for any team. They didn't try to discourage me from trying to play a sport. It's just that they were not actively like, all right, we're going to do everything we can to make sure he plays a sport. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, they were active in making sure I did something. It was, going to school, being respectful, having home training, having manners, things like that. They were active in that, but they weren't active in, you need to be involved in, this extracurricular activity or doing this or doing that. It was just go to school, get good grades, graduate, et cetera, et cetera. I think many of you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're in my age bracket, you know what I'm talking about. So since they had other priorities like school and, being a good person outside of sports, my parents would have been like, no, fuck school, fuck being a good person, just play sports. But that's tongue in cheek. But my parents would have been much more hands-on when it came to sports. So let's move on to point number 2. So the topic once again today is, if I was starting all over again as an athlete, how would I do things differently, or how would I have things set up differently? Number 2, now this goes into some things that I could actively do, because again, we can't go back and change the history of when I started sports. Had I known what I know, then of course I would have started differently, but who has that luxury? Nobody. Number 2, I would get help. This is what I would do that maybe even if I went back in my same circumstances starting at age 14, I would have got some help. Now, who knows how I would have gotten that help back in the 90s when I was actually coming up. But again, this is an alternate universe discussion we're having here. I would have found a trainer or someone who had skills, who also had, this is a key, the ability to explain skills, who could show me how to work on my game. See, this is what was missing. I knew a lot of people in my neighborhood, or at least knew of a lot of people in my neighborhood when I was growing up, who played basketball, played it well, and probably could have been a good teacher of basketball, yet they were not good at explaining how to play basketball. Now, there were a few people in my neighborhood who were good at explaining it. Some of them were coaches in the neighborhood. The challenge in the neighborhood that I came from is that we only had 3 or 4 grown men, adults who were coaches, but there was like hundreds of kids in the neighborhood who were trying to play basketball. So just with the numbers game of it, they couldn't give everybody attention and help everybody get good at basketball. They had to focus on the few who were showing promise early, and the ones who weren't showing promise, they just didn't get the attention. This is just the way that the game goes. I'm not saying this in a way that they did anything wrong. This is just how it is. If you have limited resources, you have to focus your resources on what works, and you can't give resources to things that are not actually working. Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in his book Outliers. And when he started doing the studying of how certain people become so proficient, how does Canada produce all these great hockey players, or how did people become so great at the violin? And this is where the 10,000 hours rule, which Malcolm Gladwell did not create, but he popularized, is actually first identified by this guy named Anders Ericsson, who was I forget what he did for a living, but Ericsson is the one who first put it out there, but it didn't get mainstream attention until Malcolm Gladwell popularized it in his book Outliers. And he talked about the fact that, let's just say we're taking basketball players, right? You got 1,000 kids who want to play basketball. Now the coaches come around and start looking at these kids. They notice the top 100 basketball players. So what do? They grab these top 100 and they start giving these top 100 kids additional attention and additional training and additional stuff to enhance their game. Now what happens? Those 100 kids who are getting the additional attention, they get even better. So now instead of being at a level 70 where they were when the people first found them, and the other kids being at a level 50, now the level 70 kids are now at a level 85 because they got this additional attention, and the level 50 kids are still at a level 50 because they're not getting any additional training. So now the gap has actually gotten bigger. The rich have gotten richer because they got more attention because they were already richer. Now the 85 goes up to a 90, and then to a 95, then to 100. So by the time these kids get to college, there's such a big gap between them and the other kids who didn't get the attention at first. They were in the bottom 900 instead of the top 100. The rich just got richer, and the gap just got wider and wider. And before you know it, you can't even tell that these kids once used to be very close in terms of skill. And this is the way that it works. And it's the same thing that happened in my neighborhood. The best players got the attention from the coaches, so the gap between them and everyone else got even bigger than it already was. So what I would have done, and this is what a lot of parents and players are doing these days, even if you're not that good, you can be mediocre, but now you can go hire a coach. So you can at least try to level the playing field by getting that additional help that players like me, back in the day, and maybe some players even still to this day. I mean, I still hear from players all the time who don't have a trainer. You don't have your parents, texting me, getting information to help you play overseas the way that Lisa was reaching out about her son to help play overseas. Some of you still have that situation even today into the 21st century. I would have gotten that help. Again, alternate universe. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong. Just an alternate universe. I would have found me a trainer or a player in the neighborhood who was willing to take me under their wing. I would have had an Instagram and YouTube come out 20 years earlier or 10 years earlier. I'm not that old. 10 years earlier to give me the information on how to train basketball. I would have been watching my own videos and training myself through Dre Baldwin videos in basketball. I was a self-taught basketball player. So if I had had someone who could teach me, somebody like me to teach me, I would have developed my game a lot faster. Or I would, if they at least had YouTube at the time, I would have used YouTube, assuming that it exists, again, in my alternate universe, and I would have done every Dre Baldwin drill every day. That would have got my game better, and would have got my game better a whole lot faster. So that's what I would have did if I was starting over. Again, we can't do this, but people always ask me this question. So this is what I would have did. Point number three. Today's topic, once again, if I was starting all over again as an athlete, what would I do? Here's the third thing that I would do, and these are in order from least possible to do now to most possible to do now. So all of you players who are listening to me right now, even if you are half my age, you can't go back and start any sooner than you started. I mean, whatever the situation is the situation. Now, as far as getting help, maybe it may not be so easy for you to get help, but you can get help. You can go find somebody or something that can help you. I got a program website called hoophandbook.com. You can go to hoophandbook.com right now and get help from me right now. All right. I didn't have that opportunity. There was no website I could go to where some dude was just teaching people how to play ball for a relatively low cost, next to nothing, like I am doing for you these days. And YouTubes and Instagrams and TikToks and all that didn't exist when I was coming up. So you have the opportunity to do number two. Now here's point number three. This is one that you can do right now. This is one that you can do today. This is one that is super actionable for everybody who's listening, no matter what your age is. Number three, if I was starting over again as an athlete, I would play in as many games as possible. This is one of the things that I feel like kept me from developing my game sooner. I could have developed my game a lot faster had I understood the concept of getting more game experience. I didn't understand until I was probably in my early 20s, maybe like my junior and senior year of college, that my lack of game experience was one of the biggest challenges that I had, because I didn't have the repetitions. I didn't have the reps, as they call it, of playing in live games. So even though I had skills, I could jump high and I could shoot and I could dribble and I could do my stuff, I didn't have as much experience as many other players did in just playing in live games, just doing that stuff in the game. I had done it in practice, but I hadn't done it in the game because I hadn't had as much experience. And I didn't really start to get that game seasoning seriously until I got to the pros. I got a lot of my game experience and seasoning through playing professional basketball, whereas a player who started earlier or had a trainer or had somebody taking them under their wing, they're getting that game experience at age 12, 13, 14. I didn't get it until I was 21, 22, 23. So I was playing as many games as possible. So one of my biggest challenges in playing ball, coming up at least, was not having that experience until later. So in this alternate universe we're talking about here, I would have played in a lot more games, got those reps, because that would have made me comfortable using my skills in live games, which is exactly what I needed more of. It is exactly what a lot of players need more of, because these days, even those of you who are not athletes, one of the biggest challenges I hear from players these days is two things that I hear from when athletes reach out to me. Number one, I want to get more seen. I want to play at the next level, whatever the next level happens to be. And number two is, I know I have skills, but I'm not showing them in the game. Those are the two biggest challenges that I hear about from athletes every single day. And the reason why you're not showing your skills in the game is because you don't have enough experience being in games to know what it feels like to show your skills in the game. It's a big thing for so many people when it comes to any form of performance art. Whether we're talking public speaking, playing sports, just having a conversation with another person, you may have the skills, you have the ability, you have the goods to deliver, but you don't use them enough because you haven't gotten comfortable using them. You haven't gotten enough game repetition. The reason why I'm comfortable doing things like speaking off the cuff and going in a clubhouse or doing a live stream on Instagram or just talking to whoever or being in a room full of people and striking up conversation or going on somebody's podcast, it doesn't matter what they ask me. When I go on somebody's podcast, and sometimes people send me the questions ahead of time, I don't even read them. It doesn't even matter because no matter what you say, I'm going to be able to handle it. The reason I'm comfortable doing that is because I get so much repetition in just speaking and talking off the cuff and articulating my points and know what I want to say. And I set myself up for that by having my own show where I talk to myself or to you, by myself to you for 30 minutes every single day for the last 5 years. I have the repetitions. I've gotten the reps in. I got 8,000 videos on YouTube. I published 15,000 pieces of content. I'm not telling you that to impress you, maybe a little bit, but to impress upon you seriously that because I've gotten the repetitions in, I'm comfortable in those situations. And it's the same thing in sports. You get comfortable in the game situation through playing in games. You get comfortable talking to girls or comfortable talking to guys through talking to girls or talking to guys. You get comfortable teaching through teaching. You get comfortable writing through writing. The way that you get better at doing the thing is by doing the thing. But you got to get those game reps in. Point number 4. The topic today is what I would do if I was starting all over again as an athlete. Number 4, I would play with and against. When I'm getting those game reps, here's what I'll be playing. Here's who I'll be playing with and against. Older and better players who would have allowed me to take my lumps and get my ass kicked all up and down the basketball court. Now, there's some nuance to this answer. So, yes, I would have been getting my game repetitions in, maybe playing against some of my friends who were kind of weak, just like I was, maybe a little bit to get my confidence up. But I also would have been playing a good amount of basketball against players who were better than me, against players who were older than me, players who had more experience than me, players who were used to beating up on the players who weren't better than them and just taking advantage and just beating them. I talked about this in episode number 1198, why we stay on B court for so long. And B is in quotations, B court. The reason I call it B court is growing up in the neighborhood that I came up playing ball in at the playground, we had 2 full basketball courts. One we call A court, one we call B court. A court was where all the best players in the neighborhood played, and B court was where the younger kids and people who weren't that serious about basketball but they wanted to play, they would go play on B court. And I didn't start playing on A court till I was around age 16 or 17, whereas I had peers who were my age who were playing on A court around age 14 and 15 when I was still playing on B court. And the reason they were playing on A court is because they were used to, or they would come around with, these older guys who were bigger, stronger, better, more confident. They would bring the young guy with them and they would allow him to take his lumps and learn alongside them. But I didn't have anybody like that taking me under their wing. So in my alternate universe, I would have somebody who would be saying to me, yo, stop playing with these bums on B court. Come play with us on A court. We know you're not quite ready for A court, but you need to play on A court anyway. Because the only way you're going to get ready to play on A court is by playing on A court, which was absolutely the truth. And when I started playing on A court at age 16, 17, I still wasn't ready, even though I came quote unquote late and I had to keep playing on there and getting my ass kicked on there before I got good enough that I was comfortable playing there. So playing with people who are better than me, who not only would have beat up on me because they're better than me, but they also would have allowed me to take my lumps. So in other words, when I messed up on A court, not kicking me off the court and not letting me play in the next game, or I'm not getting picked up the next day, so I got to go back to B court to even play basketball, knowing that I wasn't quite ready, but leaving me out there and letting me go through that experience of losing and getting beat so I can get better and build up my mental toughness. Let me mess up, but allow me to keep playing when I mess up. But in the neighborhood that I come from, it wasn't like that. I would have wanted a mentor who would have brought me along in this universe where I grew up. If you messed up too often, especially if you were a younger player, where I'm from, we call them young bulls. So if you're a young bull and you were messing up on the court, you didn't get picked up the next game. Or you might not get picked up the next day. Nobody wanted to pick you up because they remember how you messed up the day before. That's how it goes. I'm not saying this is a negative thing. I'm not saying that the old heads, that's what we call them where I'm from in Philly. I'm not saying that the old heads were wrong for not picking me up for messing up the previous day. This is the game, because their whole thing is what? They want to stay on the court and win, so they don't want any weak links on their team. So if I appeared to be a weak link, they didn't want me on their team because that would hurt their chances of staying on the court. So they were doing what they needed to do. They need to serve themselves. This is politics, people. Doing things to advance or protect your own personal interests. Having a bum on your 5-on-5 team is hurting your personal interest, then you're going to politic to make sure you keep the young bull off the team because he ain't got no game yet. But when I got good, those same old heads wanted me on their team every single day. Why? Because my game had improved. I had gotten the experience. But this is something that can make you gun shy when you don't have the experience yet, and then you mess up and you get punished for messing up. Now you get gun shy and you don't want to go as hard or you don't want to try as much because you know that if you make a mistake, what's going to happen? So I would have made sure I got into an environment where I was allowed to make mistakes, even though I was making considerable and consistent mistakes. I was often making mistakes because I was one of the worst players out there, skill-wise and confidence-wise, but I was allowed to keep messing up. That would have helped me advance and get better and build up my confidence and my mental toughness, just my overall skills a lot faster. So these are the things that I would have done if I was going back and playing ball and starting in sports all over again. And everything that I just said here can be applied to any sport. So let me recap today's class, which is what I would do if I was starting all over again as an athlete. Now, again, I talked about this in episode 1608, what I would do in the business side of things. Here's what I would do on the sports side. Number one, I would start sooner. Easy answer, but I think it's very true. If you know for sure you would play a sport, you probably would have started 5 years earlier because then you would have got a lot of that seasoning in earlier, and then you would have been a better player sooner. And all of us in life, we are on the clock. And sports careers, I don't know if you know, but they're pretty short. Point number two, I would have got help. I would have found a trainer or somebody with skills and ability to explain skills, because a lot of people have skills, but many people cannot articulate their skills. Someone who could explain it to me, who could show me how to work on my game. Now, I was self-taught as a basketball player, but in my alternate universe, there would have been YouTube would have existed in the 90s, and I would have had no Instagram and a smartphone, so I could just do Dre Baldwin drills every day, and that would have made me good quick. Number three, I would have played in as many games as possible. One of my biggest challenges in basketball was not having the game experience until I got to college. So in this alternate universe, I would have gotten a lot more game reps in my youth, like at age 13, 14. Because remember, I'm starting at age 8 now instead of age 14. I would have gotten a lot more game experience a lot earlier, so I knew what it felt like to go do my thing in the game, not just doing it in practice by myself. Number four, I would have played with and against older and better players who would have allowed me to take my lumps, because I definitely would have been taking them. In other words, let me mess up, but also let me keep playing when I mess up. And it wasn't like that in the neighborhood that I came from. I don't know any of you who grew up playing pickup ball outside in the street, but y'all know what it is. Those of you who did, actually, y'all know what it was. Now, I don't know what it's like these days. Y'all kids don't even play ball outside anymore. Y'all got to be in the gym. But when we came up, we played outside in the street. And if you were a young kid, a young bull, and you messed up, the old heads did not pick you up anymore. So you couldn't make mistakes. And this could hurt your confidence and make you gun shy. And then you don't get the development that you need. So it's kind of like that self-selection. So all that being said, in an alternate universe, all these things would have been perfect. That's what I would have done differently. If you are a current athlete, you can deconstruct everything that I said here today and figure out how can you set up your career and your situation so that you actually get these things. You can't do anything about starting earlier, but getting help you can do. Getting more game experience you can do. And finding people who are better than you and playing with and against them, you can do that as well. So the first one you can't do, but everything else you can to better your career right now, taking it from someone who has already been there and done that. And hoophandbook.com for you ball players who want to work on your game. If you're not a ball player, go to mirrorofmotivation.com so we can work on your mental game, because everybody has a mental game no matter what you do for a living. Work on your game. Dre all day.